Hello, my name is TANIA AHMADI, and I'm the conference manager of Iranian Women Film Festival. I'm also a film scholar, researcher, and translator based in New York. I participate in Women Film Pioneers project at Columbia University, and I'm working on an interview for Iran's first female director. This year at our festival, we are presenting a number of documentaries, feature films, and shorts made by Iranian women. And like many other festivals, we are going virtual. The festival will run during the month of March, and you can go to our website, venerafilms.com, to see the films, to see the panels, conferences, and Q&As. This conference will focus on female body in Iranian cinematic production, mostly made by female directors. These directors have been seeking a new cinematic language capable of expressing female sexual desires, a place in which women can resist patriarchy. Without a moment of hesitation, I'm going to go and introduce our lovely guests. Thank you so much for being in this conference. It's an honor for all of us to have you here today.
Thank you.
I'm going to start with EYLEM. EYLEM ATAKAV is a professor of film, gender, and public engagement at the University of East Anglia, where she teaches courses on women and film, women, Islam and media, and Middle Eastern media. She is the author of Women and Turkish Cinema, Gender Politics, Cultural Identity and Representations, and editor of Directory of World Cinema, Turkey. She's the director of Growing Up Married, an internationally acclaimed documentary about forced marriage and child brides in Turkey, and Lifeline, a new documentary that reveals the reality of working in the front line of the domestic abuse sector in UK during the pandemic. Welcome, Elam. Thank you so much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Moving forward, MARYAM غوربانکریمی, a lecturer in film practice at Lancaster University. MARYAM is a filmmaker and film scholar. She has completed her PhD in film studies at University of Edinburgh in 2012, and her dissertation was published as a book entitled A Colorful Presence: The Evolution of Women's Representation in Iranian Cinema. Her current research is on transnational cinemas and cultures, specifically the representation of gender and sexuality in Iranian cinema. The forthcoming edited volume on seminal Iranian female filmmaker Rakhshan Bani Etemad refocus the works of Rakhshan Bani Etemad will be published in spring 2021. She is a fellow of the Higher Education Academy and has developed new practice-based models in film at Lancaster University. Welcome, Maryam.
Thank you for having me as well.
Thank you. ZAHRA KHOSROSHAHI is a currently postdoctoral fellow at the University of Toronto researching women filmmakers and resistance in contemporary Iranian cinema. Her doctoral thesis focused on Iranian filmmaker Rakhshan Bani Etemad's body of work as a gateway into important discussions about gender, femininity, and the taboo. ZAHRA is interested in how the visual medium challenges system of power and how filmmaking specifically functions as a form of resistance in Iran. Her research also considers the role and influence of Iranian cinema on global stage as well as the works of diasporic filmmakers. Some of her publications include Rethinking the Borders of Feminism, the Representation of Women in Rakhshan Bani Etemad's Films, Growing Up Married in Conversation with EYLEM ATAKAV, and her last essay is actually published in Maryam's, it's going to be published in Maryam's book, The Artistic and Political Implication of a Meta-Cinematic in Bani Etemad's Film. Welcome, Zahra.
Thank you so much for having me.
Okay, I'm gonna start the first question, our topic of our topic of discussion. So, as you have seen, we are presenting a number of documentaries and short films and feature which we can talk about female body on a screen. So first of all, why do you think that there is a need to discuss the body as such in general in Iranian cinema, or in general?
Did we decide who's going first?
You're more than welcome to start, but yeah.
I think we just briefly had a quick conversation about how, in general, the thinking about inclusivity and diversity of representation is what is important. And we were looking at this, that's why it's important that female characters are represented in the same way, that in a more nuanced way on screen. And this is something that I think a lot of female directors that perhaps I can see in your wonderful lineup are have been working hard in the past 30, 40 years to make it happen, to kind of bring the diverse look into Iranian cinema. And of course, it is really important to study this. But I think I'll pass the baton to Zahra, which I think her research is really focused on this.
Thanks, Maryam. Yeah, I think it's crucial to talk about bodies and the visualization of women's bodies. And I think this is absolutely global, but I think when we talk about Iranian women and Iranian women's bodies that have in so many ways become the battleground for kind of the ideological attitudes, so to say, of all regimes, both pre and post-revolutionary Iran, which brings up discussions around veiling, unveiling, and the very idea of kind of the cinema as a platform facing women and kind of women both behind and in front of the camera. So it's not a conversation we can avoid. And I think Iranian filmmakers, and especially Iranian women filmmakers, have made that possible and have, like Maryam's pointed out, have really engaged with this idea of diversity. So yes, Rakhshan Bani-Etemad engages with the body in such a different way than someone like Mania Akbari, but I think they're constantly reflecting on the idea of women's bodies and its connection to the idea of collective. That's kind of how I read both Tuba as well as Mania Akbari's own body as she fights through and survives breast cancer. And then especially if we were to think of the image where she kind of positions herself on the podium and connects her body literally back to the movements in Iran against forced veiling, and kind of from exile reconnects with this idea of the collective nation. You see these themes in all of the documentaries as well, this idea of kind of ecofeminism and women's bodies representing the nation. So in various ways, despite restrictions and censorship, I think Iranian women have been super, super bold and brave in engaging with those ideas. But like Maryam said, the diversity stands out. And I think that's what we need to also discuss, that this idea of embodiment shows up in such different ways. And that shows a much more diverse image of feminism as well, which is often very polarized when we discuss Iran. So I think it's a great gateway into those conversations. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you.
Everything is said. Usually if you're the last person in the classroom and you ask the question again and they say, I think it's all summed up really well. I don't know what else to say. No, I do actually, but just like what Maryam and Zahra has been saying, it's the significance of looking at women's bodies in any cinema, I think, is to do with how women's bodies have historically been in any screen referred to the idea of the nation, and they represent the nation. And as Zahra was pointing out, they become kind of sites of conflict, if you like, that ideological representations hide within. But one of the films that you're screening as part of the festival is Bani-Etemad's film Last Meeting with Iran Daftari. Hopefully my pronunciation will cut it there. Okay. But as I was good, as I was watching it, I was, Iran Daftari, how much closer can that get? The name is Iran, the embodiment of the name in relation to the country, the embodiment of history within one's self, and not just body as a physical entitlement, but beyond that, body as a concept, as an individual, as a subject. And that brings up, I think, talking about the female body in relation to any kind of cinema, but definitely Middle Eastern cinema, but absolutely for Iranian cinema, makes us think about issues around subjectivity, issues around agency, and how ideological discussions around the nation, around politics, around society, around culture are debated in terms of visual aesthetics within cinema through female bodies. So it's, yeah, I'm hoping to bring a bit of a larger sense that rather than just Iranian cinema, but I have been fascinated by watching Iran Daftari's, Rashan Banyatamat's film on Iran Daftari. And how much closer can this get? You know, the link between the body and the nation.
Yeah, actually, that's a good point because Bani Atamat has another film, which I think last week me and Zahra were talking about it, like All My Trees. And we are actually talking about how the idea of like nature and tree could associate with women as well. So it's coming like in various ways in Rakhshan Bani Atamat's documentaries.
Yeah.
It's the same. I mean, that reminded me of the film Lemon Tree, you know, with the Palestinian-Israeli conflict is discussed through, for example, in that case, a lemon tree field, but in relation to one single female character's essentially body, not just physically, but beyond that as well. So it's a trope that is repeatedly used to either discuss much larger topics, but also something definitely to do with the nature. But then again, we call it Mother Nature, right? Or, you know, motherland or mother tongue. It's always the motherhood or the female aspect of things kicking in as well.
That's true.
Talk too much, cut.
No, that's good. Anyone want to add anything?
Go for it.
I just wanted to kind of point to this idea of the body and what this conference itself or this festival kind of brings together, and this idea of women's body of work. And so, like, conceptually speaking, we're talking about it as a theme, but also kind of as a concept of bringing together and gathering, documenting women's experiences through what we call body of work. So I thought that would be, it's another element to what we could think about, kind of what embodiment means.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly, and it was very interesting that the reading that about Iran Daftari and how she embodies, and right behind you, Tania, I see the image of Arezu from Our Times, another documentary by Bani Atamad, and like her kind of, I don't know, kind of that the look that she has in that moment in that documentary kind of keeps me thinking that even in that film, the character's name is Arezu, which means kind of hopefulness or wish, making a wish, and again, that's a very upside down documentary about women, a woman who wants to become a presidential candidate.
Yes.
And then we follow her journey about the fact that how she's losing even the place she's living, and losing her connection with that homeland in a sense, because like she's becoming a homeless person. And the circular look that we see of this kind of woman who represents half of the population, half of the voices that should be heard. And then at the end, we even find out that she doesn't even get a chance to vote herself within that election. So I think the concept of body and the way that these female filmmakers have brought these voices out and the agencies and the subjectivities to the foreground, it's quite interesting and quite diverse. So it's a fantastic festival you've put together with a really, I think, inspiring topic that I think forever we can kind of continue and talk about it.
That's true. I mean, having said that, on the other side, there is a picture of a little girl, Elena. I don't know if you get a chance to see the film, because that was my first time seeing See You Tomorrow, Elena. So Elena is not a Persian, like it's a Persian, I think it's a Persian, I'm not sure. But even the fact that in this film, this little girl is representing the entire the entire dilemma that is happening to Iran, and you are seeing everything narrated by her. So that was a very, like, I thought that's a very good starting point for Rakhshan Bani Etemad or all of these films, to just having a a female kid as a heroine of our all the films. So that's a very good starting point. If you haven't seen the film, I highly recommend. That's a great film. And Zahra, you talked about the idea of visible and invisible, or the politics of veiling and unveiling. And in this festival, you're actually facing a number of films that are made by directors who live like in exile, like Mania Akbari. So how every one of you can talk about this idea of politics of veiling and unveiling, the difference between these, or the meaning behind those things, or
It's a tough question because there's just so much history. What do you mean by like the difference between veiling and unveiling? Like,
so mostly in, like, let's say in films that is made in Iran,
yeah.
we're talking about like hijab, or like we actually, that's a very good question to start. Like, what does hijab do? Is it is it about the veiling, or it's the kind of resistance? So you can actually talk about this in two ways. So
Yeah. So I think it functions differently. So I think for Iranian filmmakers making films in Iran, it is absolutely necessary, it's legal, and they have to abide by these laws. So there's no choice in the matter. I think that said, the way in which they explore veiling is very complex and very interesting. And they've kind of shaken up this idea of the binary quite well. And you see that, I think, very vividly in Rakhshan Bani-Etamad's character Tuba, who in the first kind of in Under the Skin of the City, who's kind of forced to cover her hair poking out, and kind of Bani-Etamad alludes to this petty politics of forced veiling, where she's trying to verbalize her serious concerns for workers' rights. And she's kind of muffled, she's not articulate, but by the end of the film, the camera's facing her again, and she's kind of much more eloquent, much louder, much more confident, and her hair pokes out. So to me, in that very scene, through like a couple of strands of hair, Bani-Etamad's managed to show the restrictions on women, but also make a stance on the politics of veiling in the country. And I think many filmmakers do that. Mania Akbari, she's outside, so she's able to kind of explore the body in a much different way. And we see that in the visuals. And I think she's used that as a really wonderful way to engage with issues around veiling. And like I said, that scene where she's trying to tell her personal story, but she can't divorce it from stories of war that she's experienced. She can't divorce it from the collective idea of kind of women's struggle in Iran. And so when she kind of edits herself on that image and says, I see myself in them, and I see them in me, and kind of that juxtaposition, I think she's very much seeing herself as part of that movement, like many of us who don't live in Iran and who kind of see ourselves part of the community and wish for better days. So I think veiling works differently. But then you have, and I know it's not part of this, you have a film like A Girl Walks Home Alone at Night, which uses the chador in a very different way. And its symbol, I wouldn't say is around religiosity, but almost like a decolonial reading of the veil, and almost like a feminist stance that functions very, very differently than Rakhshan Bani-Etamad's films and her engagement with the veil. So I think it shifts quite a bit depending on which films we're looking at. But one thing I've noticed is that women filmmakers do make a stance, and whichever side they're on, or however they engage with it, they do, I think, take a stance on these issues. I hope that answers it a little bit.
Yes. Do any of you wants to add anything? EYLEM or?
Yeah, I was just going to say it's absolutely amazing observations there from Zahra. Really, not much to add, but also I'm fascinated in Middle Eastern cinema in particular, in general, about the cultural significance, just like the female body, the cultural significance of hair, and the visibility or invisibility of it, or the cutting of it, or the lengthening of it. There seems to be something in many films that kind of deal with this, and it absolutely fascinates me. I've had that within the film, within the documentary I made, where a woman whose husband was hurting her by pulling her hair after speaking out about her experience of going through that violent case, years, really many years, she decided to lengthen her hair and let her hair down, and and hasn't cut her hair for a long time. And there's something there about not necessarily just veiling and unveiling, but there's something, because it covers hair, right? But it becomes much more than covering hair. It becomes much more for audiences outside, who may not be familiar with culturally with the Middle East or the surrounding areas like Turkey, for example. Covering becomes something to do with women's honor and chastity and so on. And we get to see that. But I'm also fascinated within Iranian cinema, looking at, for example, what's become a classical text to teach and talk about, Shirin Neshat's Women Without Men. That we get to see the ins and outs of a woman, for example, in a public bath, where she's plays a prostitute, and she's naked, and well, almost naked, and trying to clean herself by almost peeling her skin off to the point where it bleeds. Again, the body and the uncovering of it and the reality of what goes through is really neatly depicted and really, I think, thought through in ideologically complex ways, compared to, for example, cinemas from other parts of the world. Definitely Western cinema.
Very, again, wonderful kind of again observations, and the way that in general, I think the veiling and unveiling is used as an ideological and a political stance. But at the same time, I think within Iranian cinema, we can also see that it's used as a kind of a formal element sometimes as well within the cinematic text itself, or which kind of fits within the structure of the society as well. That for example, the moment that that beautifully ZAHRA talked about, like at the beginning, how Tuba like fixes her, like, her scarf, and it almost feels that if I have my scarf very kind of cleanly put, that's when they'll take me serious. So there's an element of kind of formal way that the veil is worn versus the informal way of it, which a lot of filmmakers, I think, play with it. But then pushing it another step further, it's something that I always thought that I want to do, like a video essay on how the black chador is depicted in Iranian films. And I think there's a beautiful kind of scene in one of the earlier Bani Etamad's film called Nargis. And it's the moment that Nargis is running to go, and like within one action she takes the chador and puts it on her head and runs out, and it's almost feels that cape kind of gives her superpower kind of abilities, that then she's gonna go and fixes her life and saves her husband and her marriage and everything. So I almost feel that kind of the same veil that might be in certain positions or situations are shown as restrictive for women, they're also shown in a way that it's giving women certain freedom. Another great director that I think has used chador in that sense for me is Mehrjoui's films. Like we have in ZAHRA and both Layla, you have two very distinct scenes of these women the moment they free themselves. Sarah, when she decides that she has found a way to go basically sell her handwork, and she walks with that chador down the bazaar, like busy, crowded bazaar. And you have that in Layla as well, like finally when she figures out that she wants to leave the family. And that night, although for myself as a teenager who watched that film, looking at it, that she was this middle-class Tehrani kid, that no way I could see her wear a chador. In that moment, she decides in that scene to put on a chador and go to the street. That I remember as a child, I criticized it, saying that, why? Like, no way she would be wearing a chador. She doesn't come from that kind of like religious background. And I couldn't get it. But now years later, I can see that the way Mehrjoui is using the chador, it's more of a, I don't know, a superhero cloak to kind of give her the agency that she needs to basically make her way through the streets and make her stance. I don't know. I think it's just there's another way of looking at this veiling and unveiling.
For sure. Definitely. I think it's aesthetics as well, right? So there's this idea that veiling, like we see it in Shirin Nishat's film as well, where she's kind of, it's like the floatingness of the veil and kind of like as a poetic and kind of the imagery of it. And same with the Tuba character in the opening, because it almost frames her face in a way that just makes her almost hyper visible, which contradicts the very ideas of veiling and why they were put into place ideologically by the government. And so I feel like directors play really well with it, because it just makes women, you know, especially in cinema, it's the most public form, most public form of art, and it travels everywhere. And so this very idea of veiling and hiding is very much contradicted.
Yes. In this festival, we're actually showing a number of documentaries by Bani Etemad and of course other filmmakers, but more specifically, I'm interested to know why like Zahra or Maryam, you worked on Rakhshan Bani Etemad amongst other Iranian filmmakers. I mean, I've read actually Maryam's book for my thesis, and I know that you mentioned other films as well, but why is it so specific about Rakhshan Bani Etemad? And EYLEM, you're more than welcome to contribute as much as you can. I know. It's okay.
So the question is that why do we look at Rakhshan Bani Etemad?
Why you choose Rakhshan Bani Etemad amongst like other filmmakers in Iran, other female filmmakers in Iran?
Well, if you're referring to my PhD dissertation, basically I was looking at the shift in representation of women in Iranian cinema. Mm-hmm. So inevitably, in a way, I would have very quickly come down to Rakhshan Bani Etemad as Rakhshan Bani Etemad and Purand Rakhshani as the first two Iranian female directors in post-revolution who made feature films. And both of them, one way or another, their films are focused on women's subjects. So that was the reason I focused. And I focused on the first three female directors. So Purand Rakhshan, Bani Etemad, and Tahmin Milani. And I've come back to work on Rakhshan is just because I've always been interested in general in the film industry as a whole as well. And one thing that I think all of us proudly talk about the number of female directors coming out of Iran. And the one thing that has been bothering me, and I still don't have a good answer for it, is that there's only a handful or less than 10 directors that I can easily say that have a long-lasting career in Iran. And Rakhshan Bani Etemad is one that she is the one from day one. She's been there and she's kind of persevered until today. So that's why for me, kind of seeing the trajectory of it, and also through that, seeing that the messages that she's had in her earlier works and earlier documentaries are quite the same as they all got louder in her later films, but you see them in her earlier films as well. So for me, the integrity that her work has, it's been fascinating. But more recently, I know Zahra has worked on her. So why did you choose her?
Because she's badass. No. If I were to be non-academic about it, all the reasons I think Maryam has outlined as well, for me was the same. I didn't kind of start my PhD thinking I'm going to focus on Bani Etemad. And when I did my proposal and I sent it to EYLEM, who was my supervisor, it was the representation of women in Iranian cinema. And then I had an interview with Bani Etemad, and I remember specifically calling EYLEM and saying, I just got to dedicate this whole thing to her. Like, I just need and even then, my entire PhD only looks at her narrative cinema and only looks at her narrative cinema after 1992 with Nargis, and kind of a very focused representation of women and gender issues. So there is a world of research to be done on Bani Etemad, and so much of it has been taken over by, like, Maryam's taking over, and she's just done incredible work on her documentary works as well. But like we've talked about this, there's still so much work to be done. And we had another talk last week, and we were thinking about, and I was asking Maryam as well the same question: why, despite her success and her very vast body of work, she doesn't have the same recognition as other male directors? And even in that very talk, when Maryam was beautifully going over her entire like documentary work. So we had conversations of, why don't you talk about Kiarostami? Like, so this idea of going back to women's body of work and thinking really seriously about why it's so important and why festivals like yours, Tanya, are so significant in kind of carving that space. And I think on a scholarship level, that's also my motivation to kind of bring and to diversify, as well as the westernized feminist film theory, right? And EYLEM and I have talked a lot about this. So I think even when we talk about women's cinema, it is still very Western focused. So this is just one little way of kind of hoping to diversify, but I think there's much work to be done.
Can I just jump in there, because this is super exciting, and I do remember that moment. I think that was like a year in to the PhD, and ZAHRA gives me this call, and I'm like, this is a badass woman. We've got to do it. I've got to turn the whole PhD into this. And we're like, okay, no problem. And it was, yeah, and I think that interview changed my perception, and ZAHRA's reflection on that interview has changed my perception of it. And I know ZAHRA will start smiling as soon as I start going on about what I'm going to say. But I've always been, I think what fascinated me most about Banyatemad's body of work and the way in which she talks about her body of work is her insistence in staying in Iran and not going outside of Iran, and producing the films that she produces within the context of censorship, within the context of politics and social and cultural kind of different circumstances. I think she feeds from that. And I cannot exactly remember what she said in that interview, but something, I don't know if ZAHRA, you can remember that, but she's, you know, she's not going out. And the concept of feminism itself, and ZAHRA and MARYAM are experts on this, so who am I to talk here? But the concept of feminism as we understand it from a Western perspective, just like what ZAHRA was saying in terms of feminist film theory, it doesn't necessarily translate to the context of Iran as we understand it within a Western context. We need new words, we need different approaches. And, you know, these two scholars that I'm honored to be with, well, three scholars rather, all three of you in the same virtual room with, you guys are the ones who are coming up with those kind of concepts and theoretical approaches that we desperately need for any cinema, let alone Iranian cinema.
That's a very interesting point, because last week we interviewed Rakhshana Banyatemad for this festival, and at some point Barbara Sharas, who was interviewing in Banyatemad, asked her, you as an underground filmmaker, and Rakhshana Banyatemad just stopped her and saying that I'm not an underground director. I love to face the restrictions. I want to rebel. I want to rebel. And I was like, wow, that was very strong. That was very strong. So Barbara Sharas thought, she thought Rakhshana Banyatemad is an underground filmmaker, and said, no, she's not. All of her films, most of the films are banned, or she has a lot of difficulty to show her films, but still she's in Iran, she makes films. And
yeah, but can I actually say something here, because that's something that came out in last week's talk as well. We should not kind of brush over, just look at her last 10 years of career and say that her works have been banned and not been shown and she had difficulty. No, most of her films have had proper cinema releases. She has won Fajr Film Festival. It is only since 2009 really that she has faced some difficulty. So I mean, maybe ZAHRA doesn't agree, or hopefully agrees, but her earlier works are pretty much, and she is an icon in Iran. She is well perceived, and like our cinema magazine in Iran has always covered her films equally as much as covering other prominent male directors. So this is something that I just don't want to be kind of skewing this in a different way. She is big, she is an icon, she is badass, as it was mentioned, but it is the scholarship and the way I think political festivals around the world, in fact, kind of fed into her not being recognized equally. Because in 1992, 91, when Nargis came out, it's such a, no one in the Western world could take it to watch that film coming out of Iran. And because of it, I think it's overlooked. Because at
Yeah.
that moment, there's the what Iran wanted, what the Western world wanted to propagate Iran as, that film couldn't fit within their dialogue and their representation. So I just wanted to kind of clarify that, like in terms of things being banned or having difficulties, it's only in more recent years.
I 100% agree with you, but in this festival, because we are not showing any of the feature films, we are mostly, I mean, we are only showing her documentaries. And for instance, some of her documentaries, like See You Tomorrow, Elena, or We Are Iran's Half of the Population.
Yeah, of course.
They
She's
never.
the one that I'm. So I just also. So then I'll add something to that as well, because I was just recently working on her documentaries. In fact, for the book, is that we should also put that in perspective within Iranian industry. That in general, documentaries are not seen. Documentaries are not released in the same form and shape. So like when we say her films are not being seen, not that many other documentaries are being seen either. So like just put that in perspective. And of course, we are half of the population of Iran. That film is innately problematic with the disputed elections. And I have to say that I had the urge in me that although my talk was on her other documentaries last week, I still put 2 clips from it because I know people have not seen it. So I'm so grateful that your festival is including that film.
Yes, this is a very good time to promote that we are actually showing 9 documentaries by Rakhshan Bani-Etemad, and you have a month to watch all of them, including Iran's Half of the Population. But also, like, because I worked on Rakhshan for my dissertation, I wrote on motherhood, idea of motherhood, single motherhood, and I remember that my advisor was highly recommended The May Lady, and I'm not saying that I was forced to write on Bani-Etemad. I'm honored, but working on this festival for a couple of months and watching all of these great films from Iran, like Yeva by Anahita Abad, or Platform, which is about a body that there are 3 sisters who are, it's a documentary, and it's mostly about, it's actually entirely about body, or All That Missing, it's about cancer by Zainab Tabrizi. So they all just made me go through all of this list and thinking about maybe there are other ways to just focus on other directors from Iran who are not very well known, who are not, like, for instance, I haven't heard of Shirin Barqnawad before watching Sins from a Divorce, and I think that's a great documentary about divorce. So if you want to talk about any of the films, you're more than welcome to jump in now.
I wasn't going to say anything about the films as such, but I think I really want to say how much I agree with Maryam's observations there, and it seems like, and this is something that repeatedly happens to Middle Eastern cinemas, I think. Who are, or other cinemas from around the world that are marginalized, that are not mainstream. I think we expect certain things, or audiences outside Iran expect certain things from Iranian cinema, and either it fits the bill or it's not circulated. But I think festivals like yours, and the scholarship like all of yours, is so key and plays such a significant role in making those, coming back to the idea of visibility, making those visible. And the more we see what Iranian cinema is like from a more realistic perspective, rather than how it is perceived outside of Iran, I think the more we will understand and we will be open. But there are, as Maryam has very aptly put, there are other ideological and much larger games that play here, that disturb the narrative, which isn't always welcome. But I think we need to make that heard, the mere fact that that is how it is, not just know about it and critique it in our academic work, but really with engagement activities like this one, really get it out there to audiences that wouldn't have otherwise have understanding or access to it. Just had to say that.
Yeah.
More articulately complete my argument. Thank you.
Yeah. And I'll just add that I completely agree as well, in the sense that Bani Etamad is really popular in Iran too, and Maryam already alluded to this. And I think it's really important to recognize that she's not this kind of art house filmmaker that doesn't connect with her society. She is a product of her society, and she makes films first and foremost for Iranians. And I think she's very aware of her role. And I do think that's probably one of the reasons where she's been less, I mean, the last few years, I think there's a lot more attention to Bani Etamad. But she's been working for over 30 years, so it's a bit late. Yeah. I guess never late, but yeah, so I do want to also come in the conversation and say I'm with this team.
Yes. My next question, actually, I think most of you have kind of answered it, but I'm gonna ask anyways. So how do female directors negotiate the notion of femininity, sexuality, and modernity in Iran's society? So if you have any more thing to add, in general, not necessarily for Bani Etamad or all the films that we are actually showing, in general, how do female directors negotiate the notion of femininity and sexuality and modernity? I know that's a difficult question, I know.
It's a hard one.
I remember there was a scene that I wrote in my dissertation about the May lady, when the Furugh Kia, like, she just sits in front of a mirror and then she starts to apply lipstick. And I thought, oh, that's a very wonderful notion of femininity. And it was very so the May lady was made in 1999, if I am not mistaken. And I was like, oh my God, that's a very, even this, like, applying lipstick, for me, was a notion of femininity, and I loved that representation. And I do remember that I wrote it in my thesis. But that was just an example, just came to my mind. Sorry, I said no Bani Etamad, but I just made the point about Bani Etamad again.
Yeah, and you just made us think about the May lady, and I think that's actually a very good text to look at femininity and sexuality in a sense, because it is about a single mother who is negotiating her motherhood with her sense of womanhood and therefore her sexuality. And in quite a subtle way, and something that I actually think what makes different how sexuality is negotiated from filmmakers from within Iran versus our diaspora filmmakers is that they have to kind of work within the limited kind of restrictions of what you can actually show. And to me, like, it's very interesting. Of course, applying lipstick, I think it's a very kind of a feminine thing to kind of the whole idea of beauty and thinking and reflection using the mirror. But the other element for me in that film that really kind of shows that is the love letters and the voices. And what I think it is showing that kind of romance and the sexuality is the over layering of the male and female voice on top of one another without physically showing the male body. And I think that's a very kind of, and it's a way that something that I think a lot of people who write about censorship in Iran talk about it, that one way or another, the censorship rules and the people who are sitting there, they just look for visual representations. They have a checklist of things that can be in or not in there. And so to me, this whole notion of the voices is quite sexual, but it's not something they can put their hand on that they could cut it out. And that's why I think it's a good way of representation of how this is negotiated by a female director.
That's right.
Sorry, I talked about the same
film. No. I mean, it happens, it happens.
Yeah.
Zahra and EYLEM, do you want to add anything? When you said about, I'm sorry, Zahra,
No.
I'm sorry.
No.
My knowledge of Turkish cinema is very bad, and I'm sorry about that. But when you mentioned about the hair, it reminded me of a male film director. I'm sorry, I'm sorry, I don't know any female Turkish directors. The Walper Tree by Ceylan. There is a scene that you can see, like the girl is actually standing next to a tree, and there is a focus on her hair. But when you talk about hair, it just reminded me of that, and I thought as a way of like negotiating femininity. But
No, absolutely. I was just going to say, in line with everything we've been discussing, I think one thing that I find fascinating, and this is a really big, non-academic, completely emotional statement, but I do think that Iranian filmmakers in particular, but Middle Eastern filmmakers in general, are the most creative and creatively talented, skillful people, directors in the entire cinema industry globally, because the ways in which they have to work, if you don't have money for something, if you don't have big funding, you have to think creatively about how to get away with certain things and how to represent certain things. If you have issues around censorship, and this happens in Turkish cinema on a repeated basis. If you want to represent a particular topic which you are not allowed to represent visually, you become much more creative, just like what Maryam was saying with the example of the film, and then the voices and so on. I haven't seen it, so I must do it. So it allows creativity in ways that other people, I kind of want to turn it into, put a positive spin on it, you know, and it allows creative practitioners to be even more creative. And that's always fascinated me. And whether it's to do with representing sexuality, representing issues around religion, ethnicity, and so on, they always get away with not get away with, that's not the right way of saying it, but they always find really exciting ways to communicate that, which we wouldn't get otherwise. And I find that fascinating.
Yeah, and I agree with everything that's been said, in the sense that despite these restrictions, you can't say that looking at Iranian cinema, it's void of love and sensuality and sexuality. There are scenes where we can think about where it's there, and we can feel it, and we can even see it sometimes in very different ways. So yeah, it might pass with the censors, but I think the stories that are conveyed, sorry, my laptop just did it, that are conveyed are still there. There's so many intimate moments. And yeah, and I think one of the most wonderful ones Maryam's already spoken about. So
can I just add one other thing? Actually, one of our other colleagues, contributors to the volume, has written on this kind of extensively. Another great film, which is all about a forbidden love, by Bani Atamad, is her Blue Whale, The Blue Whale, and that film has a very kind of unique scene of when we know that they've done temporary marriage, so in terms of legality of them spending the night together, that's fine. But it's the idea of when the husband, now the new kind of elder, it's a forbidden love because it's an older man with a much younger girl, comes and visits her at night. So the fact that it's at night he comes, and then he hesitates, waiting behind the door, and there's a scene that we only see her hand coming out of the door, reaching out to grab his bag, that kind of, again, using the medial object in a sense, because she cannot hold his hand or jump and hug him, and pulls his bag into the house. I think it's one of the most sensual scenes. And then the same thing is that, and then it cuts to the scene that right before we see her actually marrying him, kind of implying marriage / what happens after marriage. That is that we see her barefoot running through water. So it's the feet, it's fine, and water is representation of kind of clarity and, you know, goodness. But again, it's slow motion as well in that scene. It's quite sensual.
Yeah.
So you can really think, you know, like the best wedding night possible, but without actually showing it. So they do, as Alan was saying as well, like they find creative ways to kind of imply it. And as Zahra was saying, that you watch it and you enjoy it equally as if it being actually kind of very explicitly showing you.
That's right.
Anyway, yeah.
I think
a
there's
lot of imagination.
yes, lots of imagination. And I think if I'm mistaken, I'm sorry, but there is a scene in Shaliza Arefpur first film, Hayran. When they get married, there is an Iranian girl and an Afghan boy. When the first night that they got married, there is a close-up of their faces, and then the guy is he's about to touch the face, and then there is a cut. And then there's the other scene starts in the window, and then it's night, so you would imagine that, okay, they are in the room, right? So yeah, that's raised. Any other things that you want to add?
This might sound crazy, but something that's just come to me. I'm a big advocate, so this may not go anywhere, so please feel free to cut it if or edit it out. But like, I've been a big advocate for some years now of scholars of like feminist film scholars. So this has been my example. Our job is not and should not just be to critique the media from a feminist perspective. We should really go and produce our own work and come up with, you know, different representations, different, you know, alternatives to what's stereotypical. And remembering what Maryam has said about wanting to do a video essay, I think as scholars of these topics, I think we need to create our own representations to change what's already existing. And and that made me think, would I dare do anything, you know, in a stereotypical way to represent, you know, sexuality or sex or what have you? How would we do it? I think we should be responsible, just not critiquing those images, but also if we were to really, you know, because we all are aware how films are made, and if we were to make those films, how would we negotiate those? And I think putting ourselves as scholars into that kind of context really questions, because, you know, it's not just about critiquing it. I don't know where I'm going with it. I know what in my head where I'm going with it, but it's not fully articulated in the context of censorship yet. But I think one would need to have guts to be able to, in some cases, I think we would self-censor a lot. But again, we don't need an answer for that. It's just a rhetorical question.
Yeah. It's a wonderful question. I wouldn't cut it out for sure. Everyone are forced to think about this. All the audience.
But I think it's generational as well. So you're that much younger than me that you're okay to do that. I still come from, like, certain things are in me. I'm a filmmaker. I've never tackled any kind of sexual scenes in any of my films, but I imagine if I had to, I would not like explicitly show anything. I think it might be, you can say it's an ingrained kind of brainwashing of how I was brought up. I don't know. Or maybe it's because the type of films I love and I work on, they don't do that. I don't know. I don't have an answer for it.
That's precisely the thing. Yeah, sorry, Maryam, I got all excited here, but it's precisely the thing. That means that there is beauty, and I mean, Iran is always known with its literature and poetry and art, right? So historically, I mean, hundreds of years of it. So it's just, so there is beauty in that aesthetic, visual style, and I think it should remain that way. If it was maybe too overt, as a filmmaker, I would want to seek ways to be more creative. So perhaps that should be the preferred way of alluding to things, but not actually explicitly seeing it and making the audience lazier. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. This might be completely out of the, you know, the out of the what's this festival is about, but this just reminded me of a very, I don't know if all of you have seen it, it's Salam no, Nasreddin Shah Actor Cinema, like by Mahmal Bof. I don't know if you've seen it or not. It's a so it's using one of the first Iranian talkie, the Lore Girl, and there's a scene that the characters, she's kind of hanging from a rope in the actual film, and the hero, the protagonist, comes and saves her, and the bad guys are cutting the rope, so there's a moment that you think she might actually fall off the cliff. In the reuse of that scene in Makhmalbof's film from late 80s, he cuts it that as if the rope gets torn, and the character falls in the palace of Nasreddin Shah, and Nasreddin Shah falls in love with her. So there's an element of kind of intertextual referencing the early film, which is beside this. And then he falls in love with the actress that has come into his court. And again, those are the years that Iranian cinema is quite restricted, much more restricted than 1990s. And it's so bizarre, like he falls in love, and they're trying to trap her to not be able to run away. And it's beautifully acted by Fatemeh Motammedarya as the Lore Girl. And they're chasing her. So there's cat and mouse chase for finding her, and because he wants to kind of marry her and make her the next wife of Nasreddin Shah. And the moment that he can actually touch her, which would have been, she disappears, and all he has in his hand is the strip of the film. and he's kissing it and embracing the strip of the film. And it's like, you know, but that's exactly, I mean, it is, for me, I've always read it as Makhmalbof's love for cinema, which is shown in this kind of a symbolic way. But at the same time, it is put on screen about a man and a woman's love, kind of carnal love, but in this case being kind of shown within the strip of the film. Sorry, like this just really reminded me of this.
That's very interesting. Zahra, did you want to add anything, or okay. This is our last question, and it's not related to this festival, actually. It's a surprise question. So we are actually reaching to the anniversary of the pandemic. So I'm wondering what's next for you ladies. What are you working on? And like, just tell us, tell the audience.
Who wants to go first?
Who wants to go first?
No? Well, I'll go first.
Okay.
Completely unrelated.
That's a fun question.
No, it's something that you kindly mentioned in the short bio, but for me, yeah, we just finished relatively recently finished a new documentary about the frontline workers of the pandemic for the domestic abuse services sector in the UK, and that was quite eye-opening. And I think next step for me is to write a reflective kind of article around the practice of making something creative / critical during a pandemic, when things are aesthetically completely different. I mean, this film is about these key workers and different people from different organizations and parliament and so on, talking about their experiences, but they were all filmed on Zoom, for example, and our visual style has been changing quite a lot, and there's something, I think, scholarly that needs to be critically reflected on in there. That's kind of where I'm aiming at the moment. But that's probably it for now.
And how can people watch those documentaries, like this one and the other one, Grow Up Married?
Growing Up Married, they're more than welcome to contact me. I don't have the guts to put it on YouTube or Vimeo as a public screening, because, you know, when things are beyond ethical consent forms and I still feel quite responsible to the 4 women that very kindly shared their experiences with me and everyone. And they signed documents to say it's okay to be shared, but I still feel quite protective of their lives, and what happens if the violent ex that they were referring to comes back and says, you brought shame to me. These things happen, so I feel quite responsible. Lifeline, the second film that we made, is publicly available. It's on Vimeo. Very happy to share a link with that. But Growing Up Married as well, if anyone would like to, they can always contact you, me. Zahra has been involved in all the work that I have been doing anyhow, so any of us would be good, and we can provide a link.
Okay, thank you so much, Ella.
Thank you for having me.
I'll go next. If I'm honest, I would just say that first survived the pandemic.
Yeah.
No, but I mean, in terms of work, it's been, I feel quite grateful for I'm so proud of the edited volume coming out. So that I think I want to kind of take some break from that work, but I'm so grateful that everybody who contributed to the book continued responding despite the difficulties of last year, and so they made this work happen. So my in terms of research, I'm kind of starting to work on, because my earlier research kind of ends with like 2005 2007, and now I want to look at and then I got a bit disheartened with Iranian cinema until 2011, and between 2000, I don't know, during the era I don't like to mention, but and then I think it's now I want to return back to it, because I think I've left it for some time, and I'm taking baby steps. So my next female director that I'm focusing on is Ida Panahande, not Negar, sorry. And so I'm hoping that will kind of, start me with the baby steps of looking at, the 4th generation female directors, if you like, and see where that takes me. That hopefully will take me somewhere with a book. But from the creative side of things, I have some, now I think I'm too shy to mention it, but I've picked up, again, my filmmaking. But I've always been, because I'm an editor, and that has always been in parallel with my academic work. But during the pandemic, I don't know what happened during the last summer, I started a company in Northwest England and have made a short film that hopefully will come out. It's not really kind of in conjunction with what I research on. So it's completely different. It's a drama, and I collaborated with a fantastic writer from Lancashire, Anthony Povo, and we collaborated and worked on this very minimal short that we shot over a day and a half when momentarily restrictions were lifted in September. And so I would like to go back to that and explore. So something that I think I want to also do is that, although that's a very kind of a mini project, combining that with what I've been struggling the past academic year teaching practice to my students under the current circumstances, I think my next research output will be about how to kind of overcome these problems. And I can see that colleagues like EYLEM have already overcome it by making films, very kind of important films about this. So that's where I'm going. So it's kind of, I'm beginning stages of the next 2 projects. So we'll see where I'll end up.
Well, that's a fruitful year for you.
Thank you.
That's wonderful. Congratulations to both of you and your films. I've watched EYLEM's and it's brilliant, and I can't wait to watch yours, Maryam. Very excited. Mine's not as ambitious, I'm not going to lie, but survival is definitely part of the list, and taking breaks, and I'm trying to learn French because why not? But for my research project, I'm working on Iranian women filmmakers. So I'm specifically trying to kind of document and collect a diverse range of women filmmakers who live in Iran, but also are in a diaspora or in exile, and kind of explore through different themes, one being the body, their works, and hopefully turn it into a book. So we'll see. I'll keep you posted.
Wow. Well, congratulations to all. It was very great to have you all. Thank you so, so much. I just owe you a big thank you, a gratitude from me and my partner, Garina Nazarian, to all of you. And we will inform you about the festival, of course. The festival is run in March 1st to March 31st. I will send you the poster, and thank you so much for attending this wonderful conference. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much, Tanya June. So
Yeah.
glad to invite us.
Thank you for having us. It's wonderful to see these,
Yeah.
all three of you.
Yes, yeah.
It's been so lovely seeing you all. Just like
Yeah, we should do this conference again.
Exactly. Like I miss attending conferences that this way you can actually meet colleagues and, you know, brainstorm. So thank you for creating a platform that we could share.
Yeah, thank you so much for joining. Thank you very much.
thank you so much.
Have
So
a-
nice to meet all of you.
Yes, have a good evening. Not for us, it's like not morning, but like noon. And hope to see you very soon.
Yes, can't wait.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. Bye.